Welcome to Table Salt. Today we are discussing week 2 of our series in Hebrews, and I'm joined by Pastor Paul McDill. Paul, can I just say you've been killing it in your sermons lately? We've been getting so much positive feedback about just like your passion and things like that. Has something changed? No, I'm just kidding. You're always wonderful, but man, these last few sermons have just been incredible, man. I really appreciate it. So, Hebrews is a tough book, and I'm so glad that we're talking about it. Last week we had an amazing conversation with David about the better than aspects of it. And one of the things that stood out to me most immediately at the beginning of your sermon, you make a statement that Hebrews was written to encourage believers who were thinking about leaving their faith. And this just kind of spawned all of these thoughts in my own head. So the first question I have is, why were they thinking about leaving their faith?
Well, so it was written to Jewish followers,
right,
who had come to follow Christ. But it was a difficult time, and so I think there were primarily two reasons why they were thinking about going backwards. One is that they lived in a time of great persecution.
Right.
So Nero was the emperor at the time, and Nero was a brutal dictator, especially towards Christians.
Right.
And so, in fact, there was a thing called Nero's candles, where they dip Christians in oil and light them on fire.
Wow.
And so there was that type of persecution. So these people were living in a time of tremendous persecution, which would cause you to go, I might want to rethink this thing.
Yeah.
And then the second, so that's part of it, and I'll come back to that in just a second. But the second thing is what they had grown up with.
Right.
That they had grown up in the traditions of the law, of the Jewish traditions. So it was all they had known leading up to that point. So they had all of these, this background of, this is what I grew up with, and now all of a sudden this was new. And I think when you combine those two things,
right,
especially, my experience is when things get difficult, people have a tendency to want to go back to what they've known before.
For sure.
So, when we started the church, we had a time that everything was great to start off with, and then we went through this little period of time where we actually had some people leave the church, and they were leaving the church for things like, we weren't doing the things that they had traditionally been used to as a church.
Right.
It's like, well, we were never doing these things. Like, we were always wearing jeans to preach in,
Right.
And we never had a choir. And I realized at that point, it's like, when things get difficult, people want to go back to what's familiar. And so I think that's some of the experience.
Man, that's profound. Like, even as I'm processing this, I'm thinking about all of the things in just my life, and how when I'm going outside of church, just in general, and I'm speaking about, there are moments that I have extreme anxiety. It's a well-known Rocky fact that sometimes I struggle with intense anxiety. And I know that in those moments that I have to stick to the plan, like all of the habits that I develop. And it is a source of and it keeps me from making bad decisions when I'm in a high emotional state. And so I'm trying to picture what it would be like to be an early believer, a Jewish believer, who grew up with the law, and the law is a source of comfort for me. And then there's all this intense persecution, and two things are going through my mind right now. One is, man, I want to hold on to that because it's easy and it's familiar. And I'm struggling with the fact that because of this Jesus, it all seems to be pointless too. Yeah. And so if I believe in Jesus, does that mean that the way that I practice my faith has been meaningless?
Mm. Well, can I just give you another example? I'm getting chased by a fly here. But another example of this in the Bible that I think is the classic example of this principle. When you think about the Israelites and Moses takes them out of slavery,
Right.
and they go, and then they find themselves wandering around in the desert, in the wilderness for 40 years, and they're eating the same meal every day. They're eating manna and quail every day, and it's miraculous, but after a while, manna and quail gets old, and they can't seem to get out of the wilderness, and their cry to Moses is, can't we just go back?
Yeah.
Can't we just go back? We had garlic and
We had garlic.
fish every day.
Forget that we were slaves.
Yes. Yeah, it's a great. If you used to watch the VeggieTales, did you
Yeah.
ever watch the VeggieTales?
I used to.
There was a great
I was
episode
like
in there.
30
They're sitting
when
around.
VeggieTales
Yeah,
came
you
out.
were small, but you were.
I was old.
Okay. Yeah, you were old.
I was old.
But there was a great episode where they're all sitting around the fire, and one of them, and they come back, and one of them says, "Can't we just go back to Egypt? We had, fishing in the Nile every day, and fresh fish and garlic, and the, that's the old guy saying this, and the young guy says, but we were in slavery."
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's our tendency when things get difficult. Let's go back to what we know.
Yeah.
And another great example is Peter.
Yeah.
In the New Testament, Peter, when he had denied Christ and things were difficult, what did he do? He went back to being a fisherman.
That's true. And I think in a lot of ways, it speaks to the difficulty of being a Christian, because if I'm being honest, when I don't know what else to do, having a list of things to do.
Is this fly bothering you?
No, I didn't. I'm like a rhino. I'm not even
It's
aware.
amazing,
that it's happening.
Rocky. That is amazing concentration you have.
But what I want to say is this. I want to say it's easy for me to have a list of things to do, because the hardest part about being a Christian is that my salvation doesn't require anything of me.
Right.
I don't have to do the list of things. I don't have to go around. I want to read my Bible every day. I want to be in community. I want to go to church. I want to stick to all of the things to do.
Right.
But I also recognize that I don't have to do any of those things. So I'm wondering, are you okay?
What's going on with this fly?
Do you see this? I see it. I'm aware that it's happening, man. But okay.
I'm easily distracted.
Yeah, that's
I'm easily
okay.
distracted.
Is that so bad?
What's not so bad?
Is it so bad that, like, if I'm just a member of Sea Life Church, is it bad for me to want to hold on to those things? Is there anything intrinsically wrong with those things?
Yeah, I think what's intrinsically wrong with those things is that Jesus is better. And so when you start adding anything in, that anything, I need Jesus plus anything.
Right.
So sometimes people will talk about, hey, we don't teach the prosperity gospel. I'm like, no, we don't. We don't teach the prosperity gospel. And we don't teach the poverty gospel. That's the
Right.
other side of that. And we don't teach the gospel plus anything, because the gospel is Jesus alone.
Right.
And when you add a plus to that, then you start getting in trouble. When you
Yeah.
add a plus to that, then you start becoming self-reliant. That the list is about what I can accomplish on
Right.
this list. And when you start adding that, it pulls you away from just saying Jesus is all that I have,
Yeah.
and Jesus is all that I need.
And that's where grace becomes a stumbling block, because that's what I see so many people failing at, is this idea of grace. And it's the thing that I struggle with too, also in my life, because I just want you to tell me what to do, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
I go to church, I want you to just tell me how I'm supposed to live my life so that I can check it off and check it off and check it off. And when I'm going through a crisis, whether it's like disease or sickness or poverty or whatever it is, or even persecution in some sense, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah. Well, we didn't talk about this much in the sermon, but at the back half of chapter 3 talks about entering into his rest.
Yeah.
And I think that is that is where grace leads us. this idea. You know, Jesus said this, and I think we get so far away from this when what Jesus talked about was that my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And we want to talk about this idea of Christianity of like, man, this is hard. Oh, this is hard. This is tough, and you got to really work your way up to it, and you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and you've got to have this discipline, and you've got to have this ethic, and you've got to stress and strive and try harder. And Jesus said, no, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Yeah. And I just think those are such beautiful words that describe grace. And we don't like that because there's something in there that sounds like that's not fair.
Right.
That's not right. And that's true. That's not fair and that's not right. It's not fair. Let me say that. It is right, but it's not fair. And the reality is that grace is always a scandal. True grace is always scandalous. Like, wait, you mean that you're going to not try? And you're going to not strive as much? And you're going to not work as hard?
Yeah.
And still God's going to accept you for free?
Yeah.
And that there's something in our kind of self-made ethic that says, that can't be good, that can't be right. And God says, yeah, that's because I want you to know that this is all about my goodness and my graciousness and my kindness bestowed from Jesus on your behalf.
So we talked about the Hebrews and how like they were struggling with this idea of faith under persecution and wanting to return to the things that they were comfortable with. What are some of those stumbling blocks that you see in the church today? Not just like Community Life Church, but just the Holy Catholic United Body of Christ.
Well, I think we have a tendency to want to add more to it. You know,
it's the Jesus
it's not enough to just trust in Jesus with my life. Yeah. I've got to trust in Jesus plus accomplish something. I've got to trust in Jesus and try harder. I've got to trust in Jesus and be more. And let's just trust in Jesus. Let's just say, I'm going to rest in Jesus and let His Holy Spirit propel me into being and doing all that He wants me to be and do.
Yeah. Sounds easy.
Right,
I honestly, I know how hard it is, man. I know how hard it is. And so, like, if I could just ask you a very personal question.
Sure.
And you can refuse, but then you're refusing for everybody.
I would not
ask him about it later.
I would not want to do that.
What are the stumbling blocks for you? Are there things that make you want to return to your pre-Christ life?
God, it's hard for me to word it that way because my pre-Christ life was 9 years old.
Yeah.
And so, I don't even really remember my pre-Christ life, but there are plenty of things that want to make me return to my flesh.
Yeah. That's probably a better way to say it.
Yeah, and I would say, just trying to think of how to word this. I think first of all, wanting to trust in myself.
Yeah.
That's still a struggle for me almost every day to go. I've got to figure out a way to make me happy, and I can't allow just who Jesus is to be that.
Right.
And so, wanting to trust in myself is a big one, rather than turn that over to Jesus. And I think just being satisfied. I continually struggle with just being satisfied with who Jesus says that I am. Wow. To go, okay, that's enough, Mm-hmm. It's enough that I've been created in the image of God for God.
Yeah.
That's enough. That I was, Colossians 1:15 and 16 says, for by Him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things were created by Him, talking about Jesus, and for Him.
Right.
And to be able to rest in that truth and say every single day, I don't need any other accolades besides those two stamps on my life, that I was made by Jesus. That's awesome right there.
Yeah.
That knowing your Creator is the creator of the world, and that Jesus himself, he made me, so he created me. But then when you put the second stamp on there of I was made by him and for him, that I was made for his pleasure, there's not really anything else that you can add to somebody's life that increases the value from that. If you've got by him and for him stamped on your soul, on your DNA, on your life, and you add to it, you add a few zeros in the bank account, or you add some other accolades, or you put some letters on the end of your name, whatever else that is, does that really matter?
Yeah.
When you've got by him and for him? And so for me, the struggle every day, and probably every day for my life, maybe for the rest of my life, I hope not, is to wake up every day and go, I don't need anything else but that right there.
Yeah.
I don't need anything else but just going, Jesus, I worship you today because I was made by you and for you.
What reminds you of that? Is it a person? Do you have like a rubber band that you snap?
No. What reminds me of that? I think when I feel less than, it reminds me of that. It reminds me to go back to that truth of Colossians 1:15 and 16. That no, I don't need that. When I start to feel like, man, I wish I had something somebody else has, or there's envy there, there's jealousy there, or there's a desire to be recognized.
Wow.
And I go, does it really matter if I'm recognized by them or her or him or that group of people when I'm recognized fully by God?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
really good
great.
conversation.
Yeah,
Really good conversation. Wish we could go more. But if you are interested in catching the rest of this series, make sure that you check out our YouTube channel at Community Life Church on YouTube. You can just search us, like, subscribe, tell your friends, get the word out. It's not just like helping us out, but it's really like easy evangelism. Spread the word, and we're happy to tell your friends about Jesus. We love you guys. We'll see you next time.